I want to start out by making it very clear that I do believe in board certification, specialty board certification. I believe specialty board certification is important. I think we should promote it. I think we should be proud of our certificates. Sometimes it's a painful process. I was board certified a little over 3 decades ago, and I'm proud of the process. I don't want to repeat it again, though. And that's why I want to make something else very clear, and that is we should have no board recertification. Never, ever. If you think about it for a minute, are there any other organizations, any other professional groups that go through a continuous process of recertification? Think of lawyers, for instance. Once they pass their state bar, do they ever take it again? No, why should they? And if you tried to get them to go through a recertification, what would they do? They'd probably laugh at you, or they'd change the laws to accommodate themselves. What about CPAs? What about other professionals? None of them go through recertification efforts. You might say, well, they're airline pilots. Okay, some of you came in on the airlines today or yesterday. Do they go through recertification procedures? Well, yes and no. What would happen if an airline pilot had to go through a written examination on the things he's doing day in and day out? He would probably get very upset, he would probably be worried, and he'd probably refuse to do it if he had to pay the thousands of dollars that physicians are having to do. But what they do have to go through is not the equivalent of board recertification like physicians are doing. They go through a check ride. And is that appropriate? Yes. Why? Because as we age, we get a little older and we don't have quite the skills, the reflexes that we used to have. And so we lose some of that. And when other people's lives are at stake, I think our reflexes and our coordination abilities should be evaluated. And there's nothing wrong with that. But why should we be asking them for written examination material that they've done yesterday, they're doing today, and they're going to do tomorrow, and they know full well? And I've had some objections of people. They say, what about firefighters? They have to go through period. Well, it's the same kind of thing. They have to make sure that they have the physical abilities to do these things. And I had one individual who said, well, you know, I don't feel comfortable with this kind of thing because, you know, my little 80-year-old mother, she... when she goes to get her driver's exam, you know, I want her to be retested. I want her to be recertified and checked. I said, yeah, we do too. But what do they do when they check her driving skills? Do they have her go through a written examination like they do doctors? No, they never do that. What do? It's a check ride again to see how their coordination skills are. So we do not want to continue this recertification aspect. And the other thing I will say is that there should be no discrimination with whether physicians are certified or not, or recertified or not. And what they're doing today is they're lobbying legislators, hospitals, and insurance companies to make it so that physicians can't function as physicians unless they get certified or recertified. And we need to recognize that the boards operate in different ways, and some of them have very high fail rates. Some of them have rates that are, 15, 20, 25, even 30%. And so if they have a very high bar that one should pass, and they have both a written exam as well as an oral exam, and you have to pass both of them, and you have only 3 tries, and after that you're out, the bar gets set pretty high. And so what happens is you're going to have a fairly high number of very qualified physicians who just simply couldn't pass all of those, rigid barriers that were in the way. And so what should happen to these people? Should they just be out of a job then? And they've gone through all of this training for nothing, and they're going to be replaced by paramedical personnel, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners? I hope not. And the bar is set high. I remember one of the exam questions that I had when I was taking my oral exams for plastic surgery boards. And the question had to do with how a certain particular facial x-ray was taken. And they wanted to know the position of the X-ray cassette, the angle of the X-ray beam, and all of that. And quite frankly, I'm not sure I gave the right answer or not. I really don't know. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter back then. It certainly doesn't matter today because these X-rays are not even performed anymore today. CAT scans have taken over. We don't even, but even back then, did I ever have anything to do with taking these X-rays? No, that's an X-ray technologist's job. That's not a physician's job. It's my job to understand how to know how to interpret the X-rays. Yes, that would have been a reasonable question. So all of these questions that are unreasonable come up. Now, you know, it's okay. You know, you pass the board, you try to do your best, and you get passed. But to recertify over and over again is certainly not something that should be expected of practicing physicians, because after all, you know, we subspecialize and even subspecialize after that. And I have even been told of some of those physicians who have had gone through the recertification process that they had to educate their examiners because their examiners didn't understand what they were doing because they were subspecialized to a certain extent that the examiners didn't, but I don't think the examiners had to pay a fee like the examinee did. I will also mention to you some of the people that I've been associated, because there have been a lot of physicians, very qualified, very competent physicians that I've come across in my career. Starting in medical school, I had a very competent, very brilliant medical school professor, never was able to pass the boards. But this physician was very competent and looked up to by peers. I myself have chosen to have surgery performed by a non-boarded surgeon. I knew he wasn't boarded. I didn't care. I knew he did good work, and that was fine. Now, why should somebody come along and say to me that, you know, you can't choose among these kinds of doctors because we're not going to let them practice? That's a limitation of our freedom to choose. Now, another item that I'd like to discuss that I want to make very perfectly clear as well, and that is that the topic has come up and it's been asked before whether we should have AAPS issue boards and board certification. And there are several reasons why we really can't entertain those questions at all. And one of the main ones would be because these certificates wouldn't be recognized at all. We've got to remember that the ABMS and the FSMB, we'll talk about these entities in just a minute, they have a lot of lobbyists, and they're out there to say and to pass judgment on other boards and certificates saying, okay, these aren't valid, and they might have, you know, good reason to be able to make that point stick against us. So we can't have any boards of our own that we're going to say, okay, we're going to make these count for something, because they wouldn't count for anything in the long run. And the other thing is that these, once we start allowing for other types of board certifications and recertifications, these would be subject to expansion. So ultimately, these would expand into something that we wouldn't want at all. And so we have to maintain our position as no recertification, period. Now, AAPS is the only physician organization that I know of that is really serious about stopping maintenance of licensure and maintenance of certification. And these are two different issues, although they are somewhat related, they're somewhat combined, and I want you to understand the process here. AAPS, through AAPS efforts here in Ohio, we've been able to at least slow down and temporarily stop maintenance of licensure activities. And I'm very proud to be able to tell you that, because Ohio was one of the pilot states, and I believe it was the pilot state that was chosen by the Federation of State Medical Boards, the FSMB, to implement maintenance of licensure requirements. Now, it's not on the table right now, but we know from various sources that it will be back. And that's scary, and we have to be prepared when it does come back. AAPS has represented these efforts against maintenance of licensure, maintenance of certification at the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. And I will tell you, I was keenly disappointed that other physician organizations did not come in and support us in that effort. And this effort really has to do with introducing legislation in the various states to stop maintenance of licensure and to curtail the effects of maintenance of certification in the various states. And when we attempted to get this model legislation approved at ALEC, unfortunately we failed by one vote. The one other physician organization that wasn't there to support us. And I was keenly disappointed, but we still accomplished something because we had various legislators who came up and said, we're going to introduce this legislation anyway. Now, what we need to do, and all of you from Ohio should do this, and all of you from other states should do this with your own state legislators, is you should go to the fall issue of the 2012 Journal of the AAPS, where there is this model legislation there. You should go to your state representative, state senator, and ask them to introduce this legislation. Because if states have this legislation already in place, then maintenance of licensure can't get started in that state. It stops right there. And believe me, the FSMB is looking around to see if there are other states in which they can enter this kind of legislation. We don't want it entered anywhere, especially in Ohio. Now, we will win on this maintenance of certification issue, and there are several reasons why I say we will win and we must win. And first of all, it's the right thing to do. This is really the honorable thing to do, is to stop this process that is draining physicians' time and money and resources all through their lives. The other reason is, and think about this for a minute, there are more of us than there are of them. And when I say them, I'm talking about the people who are at the tops of these boards, the people who are running these, the people who are benefiting from them. They're in the vast minority. And think about that. There are a lot more of us who are being subject to these things, and we need to do something, and we need to say something about it, and we can. And the third reason, and not the least by any means, is we have Andy. And if you're going to hear about Andy Schlafly here a little bit later, but he's a powerful tool against the elite and the criminal elements, those that I term the malefactors. And he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the things he's doing. And quite frankly, the other side is just out-lawyered, okay? They're going to lose. But we can't stop there. We have to do our part as well. And so I want to ask you here, how many of you are recertified? How many of you gone through the recertification process? Wow, quite a few of you. I'm really sorry for you. Yeah, that's the next question. Who will do it again? Or anybody who's going to do it again? Well, there's one brave soul, but I don't see too many others. Now, I want to ask you, how many of you are grandfathers like me? Oh, you have a lot. I'm going to ask this group to stand up, okay? You need special recognition. Okay. I'm a grandfather, too. All right, you can go ahead and sit down. But I'm going to talk about myself more than you guys, but we are the problem, okay? We should have done something about this a long time ago. And there was something that just told me that something needed to be done about this way back then. And, you know, when I passed my boards, you know, I knew this stuff was brewing, where there was going to be a time when there were going to be time-limited certificates. And I was just glad, it doesn't apply to me, okay? And unfortunately, I didn't squeak then. And I don't think I heard too many squeaks from anybody else. And so now that you've been recognized, we are the problem. We have to admit it. And I'm the problem. And we should have done something way back then. But we took that attitude that is so prevalent amongst our fellow physicians that it doesn't apply to me, so I'm not going to worry about it. I actually talked to a specialist yesterday afternoon, and he was interested in his own specialty medical board stopping. He didn't care about any of the rest of them. it was sort of comical, actually, because I had to explain to him that, look, it's not going to happen that way. But he didn't understand that. As long as it doesn't affect me, it's okay. Now, I want to introduce another concept here to you that doesn't affect any of us here except the medical students. I think we have two. And we need to bring this out. We need to talk about it because it is, I think, very important. Medical students have to go through something that they call Step 2 clinical skills. And this is after their third year. And I have some medical students rotate with me periodically. And they're unanimous in how they identify this as being an exercise in futility that doesn't really amount to anything except a test of their knowledge of the English language. And what do they have to do? Well, they have to go to some far-flung city. They have only certain cities around the country where they have to, where they can take this clinical skills test that they call Step 2. And so they have to pay $1,200 for the test. And then they have to also pay for their lodging and their travel expenses. And so, they may be, $1,500, $2,000 as an extra expense during their medical school years. And I'm sorry, when these medical students end up with a $200,000 to $250,000 debt when they graduate, this is criminal. This is wrong. They're expecting them to go do this crazy exercise and extracting money from them that they don't even have. I think that has to stop, and even though it doesn't affect us, for the most part here, we need to do something to stop this. It's criminal. So what can all of us do to help in this process? We need to rely on Andy, but we need to do some things ourselves. First of all, we need to join AAPS and support AAPS if you haven't already. Secondly, I think this is really important, is that we need to work and we need to represent AAPS on this issue at organized medicine. It bothers me a little bit to have to use that term, organized medicine, but that's what it's commonly known as. But anyway, your state medical societies, you need to go to them, and especially if you come from a relatively rural area, you would be surprised at how much or how little representation you have at your state medical societies, at their House of Delegate meetings and so forth. So your voice is important. You can go there. You can introduce resolutions. You can vote. And it's very, very important. And sometimes all you have to do is make a phone call to your state medical organization and ask them, who's representing me in my own district? If there's nobody, then volunteer. It's your job. The other thing that we can do, and that we should all be doing, is introducing this maintenance of licensure and maintenance of certification model legislation that you will find in the Fall Journal of 2012 of AAPS. The other thing is we need to organize. And, if each of us individually just decide that we're not going to go through this recertification process anymore, they're going to pick on us and they're going to deal with us a little bit harshly. And I want to tell you a little story that's probably apocryphal. I'm pretty sure it's apocryphal, but it's a good story anyway. There's a father with seven children, 7 boys, and they all fought with each other, and they didn't get along, and he was about to pass on and leave everything he'd worked for to his 7 fighting sons. And he brought them all together. He told them, look, he took 7 sticks, and he broke each one individually. And then he put 7 sticks, the same kind, all together. He said, now break them. Try to break these. And they couldn't, because they were all sticking together. And that's what we need. We need to stick together. We need to organize. We need one person and one specialty that is willing to organize and say, okay, we're gonna stop this, and it can be stopped. And AAPS can serve as the twine around these sticks to make this happen, and it can happen. All right, now I want to go through some of the processes real quickly of maintenance of licensure, which is called MOL, and maintenance of certification, MOC. And if we have time, which we probably won't, It would be nice to talk about continuing medical education, CME, because all of these processes are distinct, but yet they're related, and they're very closely related. And when you look at the foundation of all the stuff, where it originates from, there are some common elements. I originally thought that this would be a good title, Stop the Doc Molestation. And fortunately, we have stopped it, at least temporarily, here in Ohio. But we need to keep working. We can't stop. And this is the AAPS journal in the fall of 2012, where you will find the model legislation. It's entitled How the Regulators Prosper. Now here is the definition of maintenance of licensure, MOL, that comes to us as it was supplied by the Ohio State Medical Association, which I'm sure probably originated with the FSMB originally. And I'm going to read this. Maintenance of licensure, MOL, is a system of continuous professional development for physicians that supports, as a condition for license renewal, a physician's commitment to lifelong learning that is relevant to their area of practice and contributes to improved health care. MOL is an umbrella term that is used to describe the various educational activities that physicians participate in to improve clinical and practice management skills. Well, look at that term, lifelong learning. Do you know of any physicians that don't believe in lifelong learning? I don't. I haven't ever met any. But the maintenance of licensure is a term that originated really with the Federation of State Medical Boards, the FSMB. And now let's look at the definition of maintenance of certification, which is a little different. And this comes from this is language that's provided by the Ohio State Medical Association. And it says maintenance of certification, MOC, is the process of keeping physician certification up to date through one of the 24 approved medical specialty boards of the American Board of Medical Specialties, or ABMS. The Maintenance of Certification program provides an ongoing process that was designed to help physicians keep abreast of advances in their fields, develop better practice systems, and demonstrate a commitment to, here we come to that term again, lifelong learning. They've taken control of this term, and I'm going to have to object to it. This is something that we do. It's not something that they're doing. Lifelong learning, LLL, I'm going to call it lifelong larceny because that's exactly what it is. But they have taken control. We have to own this term. We have to redefine this whole process here. Through ABS Maintenance of Certification, MOC process, board-certified physicians in 24 medical specialties build 6 core competencies for quality patient care for their medical specialty. These competencies were first adopted by the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, or ACGME, and ABMS in 1999. Physicians in Ohio are not required to be board certified. Board certification is a voluntary process. I find it interesting that the OSMA, the Ohio State Medical Association, actually highlighted this and put it in bold letters. Board certification is a voluntary process. Do you believe that? Well, at any rate, let's talk about this lifelong larceny a little bit, because that's exactly what they're doing here. And it's not just petty larceny like pickpocketing, it's grand larceny. And it's like a lifelong ATM machine, and you are functioning as the ATM machine. We're functioning as the ATM machine. Now, let's call theft what it is. You know, we saw here, we see from time to time people trying to rob banks, and it's a pretty ineffective way of getting money. But they did it in Cyprus here not too long ago, but they actually did it with the blessing of the government. It's still called theft. That's what it is. It's not any different. I don't care if it has the blessing of the government or not. It's still called theft. And some might want to compare lifelong larceny, or LLL, to the mafia, but I would say that this voluntary process, it really isn't voluntary. Is this voluntary? I mean, what are the alternatives? They go and they lobby different organizations, hospitals, the states, the insurance companies, to make it so you can't practice medicine. This isn't voluntary at all. The mafia at least is honest with us, and they tell us, okay, we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. What does that mean? They're just being honest. They're saying, look, if you don't go along with what we are advocating, we're going to break your things. We're going to break you. We're going to take your life. You know, this is the offer you can't refuse. They're liars. They're calling this a voluntary process. Now you think of the medical students that end with $200,000, $250,000 in debt. And are they going to be considering this a voluntary process? How are they going to pay off their debts? How are people going to eat? Okay, you're going to eat or you're not, but this is still voluntary, right? You can't work, but it's still voluntary. But there's another important difference between the mafia and the ABMS. And that is the government is generally against, they generally prosecute the mafia. But what's happening here with the boards, with the ABMS? They lobby the government, and the government helps them to legitimize what they're doing in LLL, lifelong larceny. Let's look at how these things are structured. The state licensing boards are components of the Federation of State Medical Boards, which is the FSMB. So there are two different processes, and we have to understand how these processes function if we're going to stop these things from occurring. So the state medical boards, their parent organization is the FSMB, the Federation of State Medical Boards. The specialty medical boards, on the other hand, are components of the American Board of Medical Specialties, the ABMS. Two separate organizations, but they have a lot in common. And they're all nonprofits, by the way. So the Federation of State Medical Boards, FSMB, is a national nonprofit organization representing the 70 medical and osteopathic boards of the United States and its territories. The Federation of State Medical Boards, or FSMB, developed an MOL core components group, and the framework for MOL that was adopted by the FSMB's House of Delegates in 2010 recommended that state boards require physicians to periodically demonstrate participation in three components of effective lifelong learning in medicine. There we have LLL again. Now we have to change this around. We have to say, look, we're the ones who are the physicians who determine that we're lifelong learners. We want to determine what we want to learn and when we want to learn it, and this is our term, not theirs. They don't own this term anymore. Okay, so what they developed was some fancy language that I'm not sure I fully understand, but this is how it reads. And it says, physicians must participate in an ongoing process of reflective self-evaluation, self-assessment, and practice assessment with subsequent successful completion of appropriate educational improvement activities. And then the assessment of knowledge, skills, what do I need to know and be able to do? Physicians must demonstrate the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to provide safe, effective patient care within the framework of 6 general competencies as they apply to their individual practice. Well, there's nothing I disagree with here. I say we're doing it already. We don't need to be evaluated all, year after year. Now, this is something that was developed by the FSMB in order to justify maintaining licensures for renewing your state medical licensure, which is today, as of this date, doesn't apply to any state anywhere. Okay, and finally, they want performance in practice. How am I doing? Physicians must demonstrate accountability for performance in their practice using a variety of methods that incorporate reference data to assess their performance in practice and guide improvement. Well, all of these things sound good, but all it is language designed to further add to the complexity. Now here is something that really surprised me, is Dr. Chaudhry, who is president of the Federation of State Medical Boards, FSMB, and he came out with this statement back in October of 2012. New systems implemented by state medical boards to encourage lifelong learning should not, there's that word again, should not duplicate programs already in place or be burdensome to physicians. Really? Is that right? No, that's not the way it was being discussed. Although I will tell you this, that whenever you'd ask them questions about what in Ohio they were planning to do, how they were planning to implement it, their attitude and their response was, well, we're not exactly sure about this, we're not exactly sure about that. All we know is we want something in place. We want something there that we can have people know that they're safe to practice. Okay, so it is going to be burdensome. It was going to be burdensome. When they really were running out of excuses, they'd say, well, this is probably not going to affect most of you for 5 to 10 years. And this is the way they get these things started, you see. The vast majority of physicians pursue CME and training to keep their knowledge and skills current and already will be in substantial compliance with MOL. Well, let me tell you this. Dr. Chaudhry, to the best of my knowledge, and I think to the best of Dr. Kempen's knowledge, has never been recertified. Is that right?
That's correct. I'll show that next.
So here we have somebody who wants to make sure that everybody else is doing the right thing and practicing according to his standard and model. But no, he's not going to go through that process. Are you kidding? Additionally, this is what he said. Additionally, physicians would not be required to take an examination to comply. By implementing MOL, state medical boards will encourage individual practice improvement efforts and serve as the foundation for a culture of continuous professional development encompassing the entire medical regulatory system. Basically, what he's trying to say here is I think we're going to, he wants to turn it over to the MOC. See, he wants to make this something that is done in conjunction with MOC, and so that's how they do it. Okay. There is no evidence, no scientific evidence, no evidence whatsoever that MOL or MOC improves the quality of care. And for people who tout and who claim to be in agreement with evidence-based medicine, I think it's about time that they provide some of the evidence themselves. One of the things that you will find that is common to these groups in one place or another is this common thread of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. You find as you examine the tentacles of these various organizations, this is sort of like the glue that holds this whole process together. And so in February of 2011, the FSMB MOL implementation group met, and there were several different people on the board other than physicians. The one who actually moderated this group was a PhD. Nothing wrong with PhDs, but I think it would have been best if maybe a physician had been involved. Maybe, I don't know. But there was another person involved. There was a PA, a physician assistant, actually there to do what? To determine what kind of maintenance of licensure activities were going to be appropriate for physicians. And then there was a lawyer. There was a lawyer there too. The lawyer who was there on this committee was an attorney by the name of Richard Whitehouse. And Richard Whitehouse has until recently served as the executive director of the State Medical Board of Ohio. He is no longer there. And one of the things that I think we need to do in our state especially, but other states as well, is we need to make sure that attorneys do not serve as executive directors of a state medical board. How many state bar associations have an executive director that is a doctor? Do you know of any? I've never heard of any. So we need to make sure. Now, this is the problem that we ran into with organized medicine, however, because we had a resolution just saying that before the Ohio State Medical Association just a few months ago, that we should have a non-lawyer represent the state medical board as executive director. And that resolution was not passed, unfortunately. I'm very disappointed in that, but that's the reality. And I will tell you this too, Richard Whitehouse is being replaced now because he resigned. But it's my understanding that even though we had 4 or 5 very highly qualified physician candidates to fill that job, none of them were chosen, and in fact, they were looking at other attorneys to fill that position. And I think it's a disgrace. Okay, Richard Whitehouse, while he was a member of that committee and while he was the executive director of the State Medical Board of Ohio, wrote a paper that was entitled medical regulation with a sheathed sword. Now, that sounds a little scary to me, and I don't have too much time, but I think this is important to look at because these are his thoughts, and he's an attorney serving as the chief sword wielder in Ohio at the time. And he said this: currently, Ohio and other medical boards rely upon continuing medical education as a mechanism to ensure some semblance of continued competency, but this alone is not enough, as there may be no relationship between the CME taken and the actual nature of the physician's practice. Beyond this, the best that medical boards have offered in augmenting their regulatory efforts are complaint-driven programs limited to quality intervention, remediation, or rehabilitation. Now, I'm going to skip down, because we don't have much time, to White House's closing arguments and reasons why he believes that he needs this sword. If the best outcome in battle is achieved with unsheathing the sword, so too should medical boards strive to achieve their goal of public protection in such a manner as to avoid disciplinary battle whenever possible. Among other things, this means doing more to ensure the ongoing competency of physicians to avoid human and systems-based errors. MOL accomplishes this, thereby saving the sword of discipline for cases of reckless behavior. It is a better approach to protecting the public and preserving the integrity of the medical profession. Well, I don't think any of this is to preserve the integrity of the medical profession at all. I think all of this is to preserve the ongoing revenue stream of the FSMB and other organizations that have been striving to encumber physicians with more and more time-consuming and costly activities that are totally meaningless to the practice of medicine. And various surveys have been done. I'm going to skip over this. But what it really boils down to is money. The various specialty medical boards, 24 of them in all, have discovered that certification, board certification, is a very profitable activity for them to be engaged in. And even though they're all nonprofits, profit really is the name of the game. And so the American Board of Internal Medicine in 2009 had a revenue of nearly $40 million, and most of this, practically all of it, was from certification and recertification costs and charges. Christine Castle at that time was the executive director of the ABIM, the American Board of Internal Medicine, and here she was. She's been in the past connected with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. She's also been connected with the Obama organization. And this is what she earned in 2009. This is her take-home package. And she described it as a 35-hour work week. Not too bad, not too bad. It's a good job if you can find it. Some of you may recognize this gentleman, and this is James Stockman III. He was, at that time, the American Board of Pediatrics executive director. And as you could expect, he's an ardent advocate of recertification. As a matter of fact, under his tenure, he's developed a program where recertification never stops. You know, as soon as the pediatricians finish their residency, they get on this treadmill where it's a continuous process. They keep paying more money, more and more money, more and more processes, and it's just like a continuous ATM machine. They're just funding this guy. And when I say this guy, I mean it literally. This is his compensation in 2010 is $873,000. Now, Dr. Kempen has corrected me, and this is not really an accurate figure. The true figure that he came up with was $1.2 million, and that may have been a different year. And the actual is a little high. It was $1.193 million. How's that? Let's be exact, okay? Let's not. But anyway, he described it himself as a 49-hour work week. Now, if you look at that, that's almost 10 hours a day if you work a 5-day-a-week. Maybe he worked weekends, I don't know. Somebody asked him one time what he would want to do if he did not, if he was not a physician. His response was he'd like to be a car salesman. Well, indeed, he was a car salesman. This is his collection of vintage automobiles. And with a salary like that, you can buy a lot of them. And according to his wife, during a 5-year period, he bought and sold 40 to 50 cars. Now, I don't know how you do that with a 10-hour-a-day job, but he must have found some time in there somewhere to maintain all of these vehicles that he collects, thanks to the pediatricians. At any rate, the American Board of Pediatrics is the first one of the 24 ABMS specialty boards that is now requiring a continuous recertification process. So I'm going to skip over this quickly, but I want to briefly touch on some of the activities that the specialty medical boards are involved in as far as the recertification materials that they promote. These things can be very expensive, and they want to have their own imprimatur on it, not so much that it passes, you know, their own people, but so that it, the money keeps flowing into their bank account. This is primarily what it amounts to. So you can spend thousands of dollars on not only the recertification materials, but also the actual board exams. There have been other competing organizations that have come along that have tried to also educate the physicians who are preparing for recertification efforts. And some of these organizations have run into serious problems because they have not been able to obtain the CME credit for some of their activities, even though it was perfectly legitimate. As a matter of fact, one of the plastic surgeons I talked to told me that the non-board activity was much better than the board-approved activity, but you couldn't get CME for it. No, they're not going to do that. So we're not going to be able to talk about the CME, but there is a common thread that runs through the MOC, MOL, and CME. But I want to tell you, just so you're aware of what happened to one of the individuals, one of the doctors who went to take one of the specialty board exams under the umbrella of the ABIM, the American Board of Internal Medicine. And she was a gastroenterologist. Her name was Sarah von Mueller. And she had agreed to provide one of these other entities, a board preparation entity, with one question that appeared on the board. And they didn't stop with just reprimanding her. I mean, she just gave it to them later. I mean, she remembered it in her head, and she gave it to them later. They somehow found out about it, not sure how, but they took her to court. They sued her successfully. But they didn't stop there. They also went after the ABIM attorney's fees, $91,114 and attorney's fees. And you know, all of this was done by Dr. Christine Castle, the executive director, who is taking home between $800,000 and $900,000 a year. I think we need to put a stop to this. I think doctors need to learn the material that they know they need to learn. I think they need to choose. I think we need to choose what we need to know. We all practice different specialties and even subspecialties in medicine. I don't need to know all of the things that my fellow plastic surgeons know. There are some things that I may not be practicing actively, and I don't need to know everything that they know. But somehow some people think that I should, and if I don't, and if I don't recertify and bow to their demands, then I'm supposed to be out of practice because I can't continue on the hospital staff, because I can't bill certain insurance companies, because I can't do these things. I hope not. So in Ohio, we have one of the most rigid requirements of any state. We have a requirement of 50 hours of CME a year. And of those 50 hours, some of them can be considered Category 2, some of them can be considered Category 1. The unfortunate thing about this is that Category 1 CME has become very difficult to obtain, very expensive, and in some instances even not obtainable. We used to get our Category 1 CME through Wright State University. The paperwork was horrible that we had to go through. And even at that, you know, we had to pay a lot of money to obtain it, but yet they wanted to require it in the various states as necessary in order to renew your licensure every year. Now, I don't have any problem at all with CME. I think CME is good. I go to CME courses whether, I would do it whether I was required to or not, because I think it's important. But I want to choose the CME I go to, and I want it to be as inexpensive as it can possibly be. And I can tell you that the amount of fees that they charge for providing Category 1 CME is horrendous. It's not worth it. It's horrendous. And then they ask all kinds of questions that don't make any sense at all. And, excuse me, I just want to, well, you know these questions. These questions are so senseless that when I go through these responses, I don't even think about it anymore. I just write something down. So when you're evaluating me and my talk today, just put out whatever you want to. It doesn't matter. Nobody looks at this anyway. It just gives the people running the CME program something that they can show. That they can say, okay, we're doing this. And every year it's going to get more complicated. So with that, I think I'm going to stop, and I appreciate your attention.